Chapter 4 on comparing distributions. So we've looked at individual distributions and talked about how to compare them or how to talk about them. Remember, you want to talk about the shape, you want to talk about the center, you want to talk about the spread in some way or another, either the IQR or the standard deviation or the range, any of those things, and then anything that's unusual, right? If it has any gaps, if it has any potential outliers, and especially if you haven't actually done any calculations, you want to call it a potential outlier, right? You're always going to kind of hedge your bets on those things. There's a possible outlier or something like that. So I got this one off the picture off the internet. I don't remember even, I was like, I want something where I can compare two histograms. So the National Television Commission, I think they all got fired last week by the president. Anyway, tracked the number of television hours watched, including streaming services, for 15 days in July and 15 days in October for the same 160 Florida households. Good pick. The histograms are shown below. So they showed it for the hours of TV from July 1st to July 15th, and the hours of TV from October 1st to October 15th. So, with a few sentences, let's compare the data sets. Okay. So, again, remember, one of the things that you have to do is put this all in context. No context, you're not getting full credit for it. So, it tells us the context in the problem. So the number of television hours watched, including streaming services, and we'll start with that. So let's start, once we have the context started, with the things that are the same. So be thinking about that. So all this stuff. So what is it about those two that we say is kind of the same?
72 to 79. Oh, wait. Sorry.
So we're going to talk about shape.
Unimoto.
We're going to talk about center. We're going to talk about the spread in some way or another. We're going to talk about anything that's unusual. So with the shape, what were you saying?
Unimoto with uprights.
Okay. So I'll say for both, 15 days in July and 15 days in October. Have a unimodal shape anything else that you see that is the same?
To the right.
Yeah, and so with the October, it's like maybe a little skewed. It's not terribly skewed. This is somewhat more skewed, and so I would just say they're both slightly skewed to the right.
Is skew like part of the spread or is it its
It's
own?
part of the shape.
Okay.
And I usually do the unusual features. I think of it as part of the shape because that's what I'm looking at. So, which one has some unusual features?
For July, there's a gap in the data.
Yeah.
Between 111 and 120.
Yeah. So July has a gap between 111, 112 to 119. And a potential outlier. Between 120 and 127.
We need to put the units.
We should. Hours. Excellent point. And it's 160. They tell us that it's 160, so we don't have to add them all up. But if we counted up to about 80, and some of these you're going to have to kind of estimate, right? So this appears to be about, I don't know, 8, 12 makes 20, 35. Another 19 would make 54. And another 19 would make 73. And then another 22 would be 95. It says it's 160 households.
Somewhere in the.
So halfway would be 80, right?
Yeah.
So it's somewhere in this bin, right? So the median is somewhere in this bin, and we'll write that in just a second. And then the median for this one, see, that's 15, 35, plus another, say, 33 is 63. And I'm at this point, I'm convinced that this is going to get me beyond that. So the median is probably in this bin. So the median for October, let's see, was it 24? Let's say for July it was higher, right?
Yes.
So the median for July is somewhere between 40 and 47 hours. And for October is somewhat less. And I always put in some comparative language. Between 24 and 30, bless you, 24 and 31 hours. So we've talked about shape, we've talked about center, we talked about unusual features. What's the last thing we need to talk about?
Spread.
The spread. Okay. You can talk about that again. The three primary ways you do spread is range, interquartile range, or standard deviation. I'd rather do range on this because it's going to take too long to find the interquartile range, and I have no way to find the standard deviation on this. So, which one of them has a greater spread? July. So, July has a greater range somewhere between and let's see, the most that would be is 127, the least would be 0. So 127 hours. And the least this would be 120, and the most that would be 7, which is 113. While October's is between, and again I'll do the absolute most, that would be 79 minus 0, and the least it could be would be 72 down to 7, so that would be 65 hours. So basically you do all the things, and anything that's different you want to compare them. This one is more, this one is less, those sorts of things. So if you have box plots, it makes the comparison of median easier because the median's on there, right? When you're comparing two box plots. It makes the spread pretty easy also because you can see where the greatest is and where the least is, right? Whereas in the histogram,
Teachers, pardon the interruption. At this time, we'd like for you to release the high school and middle school cheerleaders and the AV crew to the gym. Thank you.
I think the AV crew was going until later because they don't have to change clothes. Anyway, but it doesn't always show the shape nearly as well, right? You can't see if this is unimodal or not when you're looking at a box plot. So a particular golfer has kept records of all of his rounds for the last several months at his favorite course. The first hole is a par 3 on which he sometimes uses a wedge and sometimes uses an 8-iron on his first shot. The data is pictured in the box plots at right. Write a few sentences comparing the distributions. Under what conditions would you advise that the golfer use a wedge? When would you advise him to use an 8-iron? Okay, this is actually something out of the, not quite like this, but the problem is from the 7th grade math class that I teach. So, let's take a look. You can't tell a whole lot about the shape. However, for the wedge, since the median is here and you've got all this stuff out here, what does this tell you? Yeah, it's very much right skewed. And it looks like, other than the outliers, this may be left skewed. This is the lower quartile is certainly way more stretched out than the upper one is. Okay? So, the distribution or distributions of distance to the hole differ. I don't see anything that's really alike about them. Do you?
Their interquartile ranges overlap?
I'm sorry?
Do their interquartile ranges overlap? Does that count as anything?
Yeah, that's not really, you know, the wedge has a much bigger interquartile range than the 8-iron does. So differ, be nice if I spelled differ right, in that the 8-iron has a higher median and since you can't read exactly what it is, you know, you can say at about 12 yards. As compared to the wedge at about, oh, it looks like it's about 4 yards. So that's center. The wedge distribution is right skewed while the 8-iron distribution is slightly left skewed and has, and what we'll do with these outliers, we'll say, we call those high outliers. There's high outlier. Yeah, I'm just having a stroke up here. It's okay. We call these high outliers as opposed to the ones on the far side as low outliers, and 2 high outliers.
On a box plot, do we have to call them possible outliers, or do we know?
That's a great question. When it's done for you like this, anything that's past this whisker over here is an outlier, and it'll be marked with, you know, sometimes it's a dot, sometimes it's an asterisk. It depends on what the program is that's being used. But yeah, when they mark it that way, they absolutely mean it's an outlier. It's a great question. Yes?
Wait, why were the previous ones potential outliers again?
The previous one?
Yeah.
Do we know for sure that this fits the definition of an outlier? Have we calculated quartile 3 or the interquartile range?
Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah. So since we didn't do any of that, we can't say with certainty. It looks like it might be. It might not be. Okay? Good questions. The range and the interquartile range, just IQR, for the wedge is much greater than for the 8-iron. So here's the deal. We're not going to write all of it, but under what conditions would you advise the golfer to use a wedge? And when would you advise him to use an 8-iron? Well, which one is he more consistent with? Yeah, the 8-iron he's more consistent with, especially when you see how narrow the interquartile range is. He's much less consistent with the wedge, but, he's usually closer to the hole with the wedge than he is. Not always, though. So, under what conditions? Well, it depends. If you're going to be playing this hole a lot, then I would probably say, use the 8-iron. You're more consistent with it. You're less likely to, put it in the windmill or something. On the other hand, if you've got to, you're a stroke behind and you need to catch up with your opponent, I would say, well, use the wedge. You have a better chance of having a shorter putt. Okay, so it's not cut and dried as to which one is better. They both have things that are good about them. All right. So we've talked a little bit about outliers. Let's see, what time are we getting out of here? 2:01? Really?
Yeah, it was like 20 minutes, Mr. Davis.
No, that was more than 20 minutes. Yes, Jackson.
Felt like 20.
All right, we will leave this for next week. I want to hand back your quizzes.
Oh.
Not that everyone wants them back. So let me just encourage you to, when you're studying for these quizzes, there's a summary at the end of each chapter. Since these are done by chapter, I would strongly suggest that you read that summary and make sure, especially if there are terms that you don't know, that you learn those terms.